Hello everyone, I hope you had a great week. So last week we turned in our co-teaching presentations. Um, and we also were commenting on some of the co-teaching strategies that were on there. I'm going to be taking a little bit of time to grade them, to look at them, to go through your lesson plan and your PowerPoint presentations and make notes and give you feedback. So this is something that might take longer than a week, could be up to 2 weeks. So don't fret over you not getting your grade right away, because it takes time to go through all of them and to give you feedback on what you've done well and maybe some things that we could think about in the future. So anyways, I look forward to keep reading them. I've read several already and I'm excited to read the rest. But I will email you once your grade is completed, and you should be able to read your feedback and everything. I normally will send you like a rubric with notes and feedback on it as well, so you have that. So this week we are working again in the last unit, Module 4, and we are working in week 12. So this is going to be looking specifically at culture and how culture plays a significant impact in differences on learning. So one of the objectives this week is we are going to be looking at least 2 of impacts of cultural and linguistic differences in learning, and how we can support those students. We're also going to look at what significant disproportionality is in special education, as well as considering considering culture before we do referral. And then we're also going to be learning what BICS and CALP means and how that matters in the inclusive classroom and how we can support students. So to start us off, you are going to be reading from your textbook, Exceptional Learners. So chapter 3 is called Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Special Education. So you're going to read chapter 3 in your book. I made some notes here of some things that I want you to look at in your textbook. So specifically started on page 48 and 49 is where we start focusing on what does JEDI in school mean. So if you heard JEDI, it's an acronym that stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So it talks about that, and basically what that definition is meaning, it promotes that the students have their own identity. They come from their own culture, their own background, their own ethnicity and heritage, and everyone comes to us with their different background. But it's important for, regardless of what it is, that we can support all learners in the classroom. So that's what that stands for. So starting on page 49, it really starts to look specifically at each individual component, a little deeper. So what is multicultural education? What is justice in terms of education? What is equity in terms of education? What's diversity and inclusion? And what does those terms mean, and how that matters to us as teachers in the classroom? And continuing on page 50, it really talks about the elements that you see when we're talking about multicultural, and what we should be doing to support those. Like, those elements is what encompasses multicultural differences, and how they're defined. But we need to get away from looking at, oh, they need to maybe have special ed services because of they're not getting it and they're way behind and there's obviously something going on. But sometimes it just comes down to language and culture. So those are things that we have to look at. On 52, it talks about ethnicity and exceptionality. Now remember, we talked about exceptionality meaning students who have special services or special needs. And we have to look at both. We look at ethnicity and exceptionality and all the different learners you have. So people who have exceptionalities can be of different culture and ethnicities. So that's not what we're trying to discount. We're just trying to figure out how we support students and what's going on. Is it a language thing? Is it from their heritage and their ethnicity? And and maybe English is not their first language, or is it they actually need special ed services and there's a disability there? So those are things we have to look at. On 55, it really starts to get in talking back about RTI, response to intervention, and what does that look like in a multicultural classroom and in special ed. So how are schools using RTI to support? What do those tiers look like in terms of diverse learners? And then if we're getting down into how you effectively teach a multicultural inclusion classroom, really have to look at the issues, like the instructional issues, and things that you consider. So whenever we're considering instruction in an inclusion classroom, we're looking, specifically in special ed, we're looking at how do we improve instruction for language minority students, and also how do we effectively teach them. So those are two components that the book starts talking about on page 56, 57. Now, 58 even talks more about different types of instruction specifically when you're working with minority students. So make sure you read that. The other thing that I have you read that I feel like is a good support for you, because on the test, I'm going to be testing you on what BICS and CALP is, okay? So there's an article here that I have for you called BICS, CALP, and BICS stands for Basic Interpersonal Communicative Skills, and CALP stands for Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency. So this article is really going to look specifically at what do those two things mean, right? How do we understand this concept, and what does it have to do with the classroom? So BICS is basically comes down to looking at how the student communicates, right? So what would be some examples of BICS, right? So what does that even mean? What does CALPS look like? So when we're talking about these two, we're looking at BICS in how we communicate with each other, right? So these things could be, it could be where you're having a conversation, you take in cues of people's faces. It supports them in a way that it's not hard for them to start to understand our language and communicate. Just peer-to-peer interaction, face-to-face conversations, telephone, picture cues, visuals, things like that. It's not hard for them to do. But when we're talking about CALP, this is a little bit more demanding, because not only do they have to decipher a second language, but then they have to use it to become a proficient learner in that specific standard or skill, whether it's reading or writing on a standardized test. So this is more advanced for learners where English is not their first language. So in this, we have to look at how we are teaching them, what supports are in place. So there's actually a matrix here that really helps represent how this is really a continuum for students, right? So things that they will always be in. So the cues, or when we look at this continuum, we have to look at it from a term of context embedded to context reduced. Okay, so this would range from a situation where the learner uses external cues and information such as facial gestures, say objects and pictures, to understand different languages. But on the other spectrum, okay, this is where the learner has to rely on linguistic cues, right? And has to have a knowledge about the language to understand the meanings behind it. So really, this vertical axis you see here, this matrix, really relates to the degree and involvement in the task for the student, right? So the student's going to be moving from tasks that are not very demanding, you see how it says undemanding, to demanding tasks, okay? So, for instance, this activity in the upper left corner here, like the face-to-face conversation, is appropriate for a beginner when English is not their first language. But as they move, think about if you don't know that language very well and you can't look at their facial dress suggestions. There's no cues for you to look at, no gestures, no pictures, nothing. To go into a conversation on the phone where you can't read facial gestures or cues or have any pictures to help you and support you, it's a little bit more demanding. They can still do it, but then you move into where it's really demanding, right? So taking tests, maybe having them conduct an experiment. So this is something that you have to look at this model, but we have to figure out how we can support them, right? So here on the next page, it really starts to dive a little bit deeper, right? So what they do is they have a table here to help you distinguish between BICS and CALP, and what are some examples of what that would look like, right? So when we think about language, we think about social language, peer-to-peer interaction, teacher-to-peer interaction, teacher to student. So how we learn is we use facial expressions, eye actions, we observe and watch what they do, right? Modeling it for them. Your cues, your stress on your voice, your intonation, using pictures and objects that represent certain things. You can ask questions to repeat if you need more clarification. So these are examples of what we would use for BICS, right? It's that social oral communication. It is how we use that context embedded language, right? But then we move to CALP. Remember, this is more of a context reduced, right? Meaning they have to look at things academically, right? And this actually takes 5 to 7 years for students to be able to become proficient in this, because they don't have verbal cues. There's less face-to-face interaction. They're just looking at the paper or the test or the writing prompt. Literacy, think about narrative or expository textbooks. They're written not only in English language, but beyond proficiency of most students. So this is difficult for them. There's not a lot of support. Think about how abstract academic language can be. So because of that, it really puts them up here in the, demanding situation that you have to support them. So this article really dives really deep into the two types that you're going to have to look at. The next part really talks about how can we determine if a task falls between BICS, cognitively undemanding, or if it's CALP. So using this matrix really helps you get a visual understanding of how they move on this continuum, right? So when we look at context-embedded language, this is really supported by cues, objects, props, manipulatives, pictures, graphs, charts, all those things. It helps them get an understanding. It helps them interact and construct further meaning. But when you talk about context reduced down here, there aren't many clues to support them, right? So it's really abstract. Think about textbooks and novels and lectures and academic tests, right? So these quadrants really show you how difficult it is as they move through this continuum. So make sure you look at that as well. So the other thing I put here for you is a video that really dives a little bit deeper into supporting students and shows you what does sheltered instruction mean for English language learners and how does it help them, okay? So this video I want you to watch. It's really short. It's like under 3 minutes, but it really shows you how to use visual cues and what does sheltered instruction look like and how does it help them in the classroom. So I have that for you to watch. Another thing is I have some additional resources. So I really like IRIS modules because I feel like IRIS modules really help you because there's a lot more interaction within the IRIS modules. This is a support for you. This is not something you've got to complete. I know we've completed a lot of IRIS modules this semester, but this is one I put as an additional resource. It really lets you know as a teacher what you need to know about those who are learning to speak English, okay? This is really good because it walks you through, it talks about research, it really talks about what does second language acquisition mean. Now, keep in mind, when I give tests, I take questions from everything, from IRIS modules, from PowerPoints, from Nearpod presentations. So So they come from lots of different places. So make sure that even though if I'm giving you learning support through resources and you only look at some of the things, you may miss one of the questions, okay? So just, even if we don't have questions on second language acquisition, right? It's important for you to understand what it is as a teacher in an inclusive classroom, because inclusive means all learners, unique learners, diverse learners, people who English is not their first language. They have different cultures and ethnicities. You have those who have exceptionalities, maybe some who have struggled in a certain subject matter. So because of this, it's important for you to be able to support them in the classroom. So I would like you to look at that IRIS module if you get a chance. The other thing is here, I have a Nearpod presentation. I went in and double checked the link. It should be working. Nearpod presentations are great because it's better than just a PowerPoint, because it gives you additional information. It allows you to be more interactive. There's discussion questions, and it even gives you feedback right away. So those I always like. So make sure that you watch the Nearpod presentation. If the link doesn't work, please let me know. Now, how are you going to be assessed this week? Well, you're going to complete a discussion, okay? So I have a video here for you that you're going to watch, and then after you watch the video, you're going to complete the discussion board questions. Okay, so after watching the video, I want you to tell me, how can culture impact behavior in the classroom, and what cultural factors affect teaching? Now, remember, there is where it says responded to other classmates, but this is such a large online class. I'm okay if you respond to one. I see a lot of people respond to 2 people. I think that's great, but you're not responsible to do it. If you're just doing one, at least one, I will still give you full credit. Just keep that in mind, that to keep the conversation going, sometimes it's helpful to reply to 2 classmates' discussion. And sometimes you may have people that have a lot of the same material or discussion answers you do. I would always look for those that maybe have different answers, or maybe added a little bit more if you want to keep the discussion going. So this week is the last chance for RAD. Okay, so you had to complete 4 RADs in total, reading assignment discussions, and this week is going to be one that says, it's an article that says, consider culture before referral. So this is an opportunity to get that last RAD in, especially if you maybe have 3, you need 1 more, so make sure that you do that if you're needing one. Another thing I wanted to point out here for you is that it says co-teaching strategy presentation discussions. That's just reminding you what we did in week 11, where you look at the presentations and then you comment on them about the different strategies you learned about. It's just making sure that you complete that. And then another thing is, I told you had an extension on your service learning paper, your written analysis. I did that for the mere fact that a lot of us got in service learning classrooms later than anticipated. So I wanted you to be able to get time to do your actual paper and have time for reflection. So the due date is November 19th. So hopefully that helps you have some extra days to get that done. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We are kind of almost through the end. We have week 13 and 14, and week 13 and 14 is kind of going to go together, and I'll explain that in the next video. So they will actually have the same due date. And then I will also be sending out an email for you telling you when your final exam will be open and when it will close. And then I will also be talking about doing your post-test and your course feedback, because that also counts as part of your grade in here. But I'll be sending a video and we'll talk about that in the next couple videos. And I'll also send an email, so you'll have 2 ways to look at that, and it'll be on the course homepage as well. Alright guys, I hope you have a great week. Hang in there. We're almost through the end of the semester. The end of the semester ends December the 1st. Technically November 30th, because no one has class on Fridays. on December 1st. So we're almost done, so hang in there and have a great week and take care. And until the next time, when I see you, we'll talk about all this stuff wrapping up the end of the semester. So take care, guys.